Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to show you my process for doing microcement. And keep in mind, this is my first microcement bathroom. It was one of the most challenging projects of my entire career, and it took every bit of skill I had to complete this in a professional manner. So before you decide to tackle a DIY microcement project, maybe watch this video to find out what some of the challenges were and see if you think it's within your skill set. Currently, there's been a huge push by microcement companies to expand into the DIY market, but I personally think this does most people a disservice because I think it is too challenging for most DIY to tackle. However, if you're up for a challenge and you want to spend some money on some really expensive product that you can't return, feel free to try microcement. For this microcement bathroom, we chose to use Novacolor wall to floor. And before I got started with any application, I first applied thin set over the floor and over this countertop just to flatten things out and get it looking a little more uniform. The foam board substrate was very uneven, and I figured it would be better to start leveling it out with thin set instead of $300 bags of base coat. And for anyone who notices, yes, it would actually be easier if the tile floor and the nooks were tiled first, but I'm just working with what I got here. And be sure to protect anything you do not want this stuff getting on. It is epoxy based and will stick to everything. All of these openings will be for cabinets or saunas or various things like that. So you can see there's a lot of corners, a lot of things, and the entire place will be coated in microcement. The green stuff all over the walls is Hydroban. It is a waterproofing and crack isolation membrane. Not only did we have the Curdy system for waterproofing, the Hydroban then did a second layer. So this place was really watertight, and in some cases we would even do a couple layers of the Hydroban. The other reason we used it was also as a primer for the Novacolor wall to floor. I checked with the Novacolor rep and they said it was an adequate primer to promote adhesion and water resistance. Now, one of the first things that makes microcement more difficult than, say, just your regular plastering is all of the weighing and measuring of the materials. And one of the things that you don't see in this video is also the epoxy. So at every stage, there is usually a 2-part epoxy mixed in as well. But because I was working with so many things that had such a short pot life, I just didn't film a lot of it. So just know that there should be epoxy also getting mixed in there, a 2-part epoxy, which makes it really gooey, really messy, and not very fun to work with, but is part of the whole waterproofing system and should not be left out. So this product is the wall to floor Rasal, and I would basically describe it as bougie confill. It's concrete fill for rich people. At $250 to $300 Canadian per bag, it is very pricey and you don't want to waste the stuff. So not only was it stressful just measuring out all of the materials and knowing how short of a working life I had with each one of them. So in this case, this one was 45 minutes. This job also had no adequate parking, so I had to use a meter outside, and every 2 hours I would have to move my vehicle or risk a parking ticket. So it actually made it kind of a strange version of hell. It was a lot like that show Lost when the guy had to get up every 50 minutes to press a button, if you guys remember that. It was a similar feeling. So on top of a limited working time, the other thing you have to do is embed a layer of this mesh. So this is like EIFS stucco mesh, really thick stuff. You can get the self-adhesive one, but it's not recommended by the manufacturer. So anyways, you have to install this stuff with your first base coat. As you can see, I've got the pieces scattered all about. Now, honestly, I didn't do it on all of the walls. I did it in the shower walls and I did it on the floor because those are the high traffic areas where it really needed it. While the manufacturer will say you need it for all surfaces, I believe it's overkill and you can get away without using it for ceilings and walls that are not inside of a shower or will not get a lot of full contact. Like as long as nobody's regularly body checking the walls. And honestly, this stuff is actually really strong. I had an old bucket that I didn't clean out, so it had the Rasal all up the sides of it and all cured, and I could not crack the stuff out of the bucket. It was fully bonded to the bucket. So from that, I gathered that it actually has really good tensile strength and flexibility. One of the things they recommend is using a notched trowel to help set the fiberglass mesh. I did do this on the first coat, but I found it to be pretty time consuming and unnecessary. So after I moved on from this wall, I just laid the stuff on with a trowel, embedded the mesh, and then kept troweling. Now, for anyone who has experience in drywall and has trouble getting their tapes to sit flat, basically think of this as a giant mat of drywall tape that you're trying to get flat. So if you struggle with a 2-inch wide tape, this is going to be a big struggle for you. Once I had it sitting flat, it was time to lay another coat on top of it. And here is where some of my drywall knowledge actually started working against me. I worked so hard to get nice coverage and make sure that you couldn't see the mesh too much, whereas all I had to do was skim the mesh tight and it would have been enough. There will be a second base coat which will fully cover the mesh, and then the next 2 coats of finish will definitely cover it. So I went way overkill trying to leave like the same kind of coat that I would normally do on drywall on this. As you can see, it basically looks like I coated it with drywall. A lot of those lift-offs just would have been way easier to cover on the second base coat if I had have just left it tight. The bench was probably my favorite feature on this whole thing, and throughout the whole process, I am always working to try and keep the corner round instead of letting things get sharp. The rounded corners were the features that I ultimately found the most pleasing in this whole project, and it took a bit to get there, but I did get them. Another thing to keep in mind is this stuff dries and cures incredibly hard. There is no sanding it whatsoever. You can scrape it a little bit, but basically anything you leave will be there in the finish. So as you can see, we've got the first coat more or less done. I used the mesh on the countertop. And even at this stage, the texture is starting to look quite appealing. I actually really do like the way the Rasal looks, even as a finish itself, although it isn't suitable for one. So I hope you guys enjoy scraping, because this is one of the primary things you're going to be doing during this job. There's 3 things that you will spend most of your time doing, and it is not application. It is scraping, vacuuming, and protecting the other surfaces. I found this Microcement project to have the most amount of consumables I have seen on any other job. The amount of tape, plastic, vacuum bags, rollers, trays, brushes, and measure containers would be enough to sap you of your profits. So you'll notice that this stuff is quite runny, and I believe it's intended to be spread quite thin. You will also notice throughout the course of this video that I'm actually wearing earplugs through almost the entire project. Just the sound of the trowel going across the hawk and across the wall was probably enough to actually cause hearing damage. The same way standing outside in traffic for long periods of time can give people hearing damage. It's not too much, but it's enough and it's constant. Another one of the bigger challenges of this project is anywhere that you have an outside corner, you have to coat it continuously, especially if you're trying to round the corner over a little bit. You can't do one side and then go back to the other. You have to continuously go back and forth from one to the other. The main reason being is that it's fairly unsandable, so whatever shape you give is what shape it's going to be. I did later in the video find out how to sand it. I forgot to film it, but I'll show you guys the tool that I used that'll help you get those rounded corners if that's what you're looking for. But for all intents and purposes, it is best to imagine that this is an unsandable product. How you leave it is how it will be. So the floor was probably the easiest to do because you've got gravity helping you. You can see just how runny the stuff is. So now imagine doing that on your walls. I would say the floor was the easiest part, but even it was quite time consuming. So I think this was all I filmed of the floor because I started running out of space for the tripod, not to mention running out of time, both in the setting of the material and running out of time for parking. Don't forget about those crazy constraints I had. So as you can see, this stuff pretty much is what it is once you leave it. I found that I could scrape the nubs off by using the edge of my knife. But that was about it. And also, expect that you're going to go through this knife by the end of the job too. And we are finally on to the finish coat. Look how runny this stuff is. And there is epoxy in this one as well. For application, I used a stainless steel Co-Me trowel. I don't know how you say it. It's like co.me. So these guys actually also tried to send me a bunch of stuff to try and get a bunch of, promotion for their product. And the deal they wanted was they're basically like, okay, we'll send you a package of tools. And for every tool we send you, like we're just talking a trowel that maybe costs like $80 or something, we want a dedicated video, at least one for each tool. I'm like, you guys are out of your mind. The amount of time it takes for me to make a video for one little tool, I'm way better off to just buy each one as I need it than to get a bunch of free tools that I have to promote for you. So that's just a side note. They're great tools, but I'll stick to buying them considering the offer that they gave me. I hope you guys like math because if you want to do this, you're going to have to do some. Yes, if you are not comfortable with fractions, with decimals, with converting decimals to fractions, with imperial and metric measurements, then you are going to struggle with this because for the entire thing, you are going to be doing math for square footage, you are going to be measuring materials, and you're going to be doing conversions. Now, this is great news for all the accountants who are planning on doing their first microcement job. This will be the easiest part for you. But for most of us civilians, this kind of math is something we left back in high school. Now, thankfully, when I did my carpentry apprenticeship here, maybe about 15 years ago, I really got to brush up on my math because, believe it or not, carpentry is a very math-heavy subject where we do a ton of conversions. The reason these square foot calculations are so important is that all of these products are incredibly expensive. You can't afford to waste any of it. So if you can't calculate how much you need for a square foot space, then you're going to be wasting so much money. So here's the look after the first coat. It covers pretty well, but you can still see some of those ridges shadowing through, which is why it will need a second coat. This was one of the more challenging areas because there was so many continuous surfaces to coat. So not only was there this wraparound for the sink detail, there was also the front face of the countertop at thigh level that also needed to be coated. And you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal? Just coat it all. Stop complaining. The problem is when you leave it somewhere too long, you won't be able to come back and trowel it out the same as a wet spot. You start getting an inconsistent finish and it starts dragging and pulling. It's very similar to trying to keep a wet edge when painting. So I'm now prepping for the final coat, and I'm using one of those blocks that you use to sand the edge of a tile. It wasn't bad, but I actually didn't find it aggressive enough. Before my final coat, I realized I wasn't actually happy with a lot of the corners. I liked the ones that were rounded over like that, but the one at the front of the countertop is way too sharp. I actually ended up using this diamond file, which worked really well to help me get consistent profiles around the entire job, but unfortunately I didn't film any of it. And don't forget that in between the many coats of product on this job was a scrape. Constantly scraping down the walls with this, and then constantly vacuuming up the job after. And about 3/4 of the way through the job, I noticed my knife was no longer flat. Just about 5 minutes on a file and I was able to get it flattened back properly. So not only was there the non-stop scraping and the non-stop vacuuming, it was also non-stop protection against the previously coated surfaces, because you didn't want to drop anything onto your finished surface. This was one of the more challenging walls of the project as well, starting in the right-hand corner, going across those small flat surfaces, and then into this back left corner, and trying to keep a wet edge the whole time. And this is also why I didn't film most of the project, because I had my hands full just trying to get this thing done and leave a professional looking finish. Not to mention, had I filmed the entire project at the speed that it's normally done at, this would be about a 4 or a 5 hour video, even after condensing it. So on my first finish coat, I started with the inside of the countertop, whereas this time I decided to leave the inside edge to the very end and focus instead on getting a nice round over on that countertop before going to the inside of the sink cutout. This surface was actually the most challenging one of the entire project. So when I tell you that this was the most challenging, painstaking, time-consuming project I have ever done in my entire career, I am not kidding you. I don't think the video quite does it justice as to just how painstaking this process is. And even once the final coat of product is applied, there is still a coat of mineral sealer and 2 coats of finish. And each one of those is still a two-part system. It still requires math, and you are still under a time constraint when applying it. So here's the finished product, and I can honestly say I do not think that this is a DIY friendly project. I got through it by the skin of my teeth. But if you think you have the chops to take on a project like this, well, at least now you have an idea of what it might entail. There are simpler designs, however. And on that note, I'm going to stop talking and let you guys appreciate it.
Hey, your little friend. Hey. Bye bye.